Obviously, it's been a year and a couple of months since we last had you on the show. I think you were probably I want to say our first episode of 2023. I
Mhm.
think it was around that time. Obviously, you'd just released your LP Laal, which was a concept album focusing on the influence of Bollywood and Indian cinema, covering concepts such as caste, nationalism, censorship. There's a lot going on there. So it was really nice to speak about that project
Yeah.
as a whole with you. But obviously, a year and a bit has passed since then. So what have you been up to?
I think people forget that an album cycle kind of begins when it's available to listen to in full. Like when you work on a body of music, the end of the album cycle is finishing it and sticking it out there. Whereas now it's like you stick it out there and then you begin promoting it because at long last everyone can hear the whole thing and not just here's a single, here's a 30-second teaser. So a significant amount of time there was spent just kind of beginning the PR cycle around the album. And I went on a big journey, kind of not learning just who's into the album, but who am I as an artist and what am I trying to say? And this isn't me coming at you with my politics are any different or I'd write music any different. Like everything I wrote on that album, I still believe to the to the fullest of my opinions on anything. I still want to fight caste and nationalism and censorship with my music, but it took a long time to figure out what kind of audience Lal has. I mean, I had lovely people like yourself platforming the record really early on, just as it came out, and I've been really lucky to have support from like BBC Asian Network and a lot of fellow artists and like festivals like Dialed In and DJ Collective Daytimers, etc. But unfortunately, I put the record out and I had a team around me that weren't the best fit. And I think there was a bit of a tight mismatch between who made the record and who was helping promote it a little bit. And I think that what people who might not play music or work in the industry maybe won't realize is a lot of finding who to work with. It's a bit like dating. Like we were talking about getting married and all that kind of stuff. And I'm happily married to someone who plays music with me on stage. So I'm quite spoiled in that regard. But when it came to having a team around me to work on the record with. The record came out and I worked with people who are based in Scotland, but if I'm being transparent about it, the British Asian scene in Scotland leaves a lot to be desired at this point in time. It's developing really slowly. There's some cool stuff happening, but it's just not on par with what's happening in the north of England or what's happening in the Midlands or in London. And I love Scotland. I'm always going to think of myself as Scottish and I'm always going to live here. But it took going to these places like Manchester, like London, like Birmingham to figure out that the community built around the album is more nucleated around those places than it is in Scotland per se. And it enjoys a small following here in Scotland. But I've kind of learned like where do I fit into the Scottish ecosystem and where do I fit into the UK ecosystem? And I realized I really want to connect with people who get what the songs are about. It's not enough to just kind of bop along and go, "Oh, that's a cool guitar part." I really grind when it comes to like the lyrics, the themes I explore, and I'd rather not lose all my sanity going into an audience who might not fully be invested in what I'm singing about. I had a couple of people reach out who were in America who were really into like a couple of the lyrical themes on Lal, and they were so specific about specific lyrical Easter eggs that they were into. The example one of them chose was there's a song called "The Item Girl" on the record, and it's about the item girl trope in Bollywood and how a woman who owns her sexuality is not thought of as desirable as much as a subservient woman would be in South Asian circles. And I referenced this painting called Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue, which is a painting by Dutch American painter Barnett Newman. And this painting is just three vertical lines, or four in some cases. But decades ago, people were so offended that this passed for art these days that someone slashed it with a box cutter in a gallery and they had to hide it from the public. But they tried to restore the painting and then they brought it back, but someone was offended at the restoration job being kind of crap. So they slashed it again. And now this painting is out of sight because everyone's worried about the next time someone's going to attack this inanimate bit of canvas. And that story really spoke to me about what does it mean to offend somebody? What's offensive? And as soon as I got this bit of fan mail about this lyric, I was like, wow, someone out there's actually listening to what I'm doing. And there was like a tipping point after that where over time I developed this really engaged fan base online. And then I kind of learned that I grew up in white boy indie guitar circles where you'd hop in a smelly van and tour up and down the country. But that's not actually where I'm at as an artist. Like, there's a mismatch between what I thought I'd need to do to build an audience and what's actually happening. What's ended up happening is my most engaged following come from like my content, my video essays, some of the music stuff I do to explain why I sing about what I'm singing. And a lot of people now know me for as much about my content as they do about my music. And the two obviously cross over quite a bit. But me learning, oh, wow, there's this kind of needing to be chronically online thing that means that I build these real fans that I've always dreamt of having. But you know, I'm preaching to the choir here. You're obviously quite online with the radio station and stuff. You need to find a way to protect yourself when you're online that much. And here's the thing. I, in my head, thought, oh, people who like guitar music, people who are like maybe millennials, just like me, will be really into the album. But when I looked into it, the average fan of Lal was born as I went to university, which to me was quite, wow, how is that the case? It's like someone would leave me a really nice comment. I'd skate past their profile and be like, oh, what kind of person is this that was really kind about my music? And it says, oh, why does this person's name have '08 at the end of it? And it kind of gave me the existential crisis of, oh, I was literally already an adult when this person was born. But it's a great responsibility to be trusted with such an engaged audience. Even if they're a bit younger, that's fine. I don't want to speak for you, but I've noticed that I think I'm in my, I'm going to be in my mid 30s very soon. And it's like people in their 30s seem to be hitting their midlife crisis point earlier than I remember with previous generations. When I was growing up, people in their 50s would be doing the buying a motorbike, getting a ponytail, getting a leather jacket, all that kind of stuff. But it feels like millennials are hitting that point in their late 20s. And I just kind of feels like people my age aren't typically looking for new music to listen to. They're kind of in that nostalgia thing. And that's fair enough. But realizing that younger people really take to Lal and what it's about means that I had to change up everything I did. Everything needed to be like, right, well, if people in Toronto really like the album, I can only get to them once every 2 or 3 years. I can't go there all the time. I mean, even getting to London and even getting to Manchester, etc. I played Manchester once since the last interview. I was lucky enough to play Manchester Jazz Festival. I opened for Aaron Ghosh, who's a bit of a local hero up that way as well. And as amazing as it was to play that show, I can't play even Manchester multiple times a year. It tends to be one or two specific shows that make a lot of sense in the context of the music I make that I'd play. And yeah, I've had to really change the way I do it. I have to be constantly in touch with my audience, but distant enough I'm the last person who's going to get on stream or get on Instagram and act like I'm any younger than I am. I'm at a weird point in my life where I'm discovering new things. I'm really into a lot of things that I wasn't into before. Like, I didn't realize I'd be so into things like fashion and streetwear. And I'm really interested because I feel like South Asian culture, as much as it's taken off with music, it's taken off in fashion as well. Like, there's so many interesting fusions of things like streetwear with like really regional Indian like textile styles all combining. And if you go to festivals like Dialed In, etc., you start to see like fusions of styles in fashion as much as music and culture, and it's fascinating to me. And I want to explore that from a point of view of that's something I'm genuinely interested in. But I went through a phase of worrying about, oh, am I going to be that cringy older guy who's trying to dress young to get to the kids or whatever? But my audience see that it comes from this genuine point of interest. Like, I'm really interested in you can see this pile of sneakers behind me developing. And a lot of that's, there's some small batch of designs there that weren't too expensive because the designers weren't as well known. But there's also some like massive, like, there's like Converse and stuff there too. It's like, I've got this new hobby. I need to find a way to balance out music being a job. I'm sure you feel that way too. Like, working in the entertainment industry is incredible, especially if you get to do it for a living, but you can't do it all the time. You need to find like a point of balance, right? And for me, finding other hobbies like streetwear and stuff, integrating that into my personality online has been really fulfilling because it turns out a lot of my audience enjoy the same other things that aren't music that I do. So Lal's enjoyed quite a lot of success. It was written about in Rolling Stone and The Guardian. It was nominated for Scottish Album of the Year. I got to perform it at the Roundhouse in London, played quite a few festivals like Manchester Jazz Festival, and I got to do a Radio 4 live session with it. Where it's been more slow to grow is in those kind of metrics, like things like streaming. But over the past 6 months, those have really taken off as well. And we live in an era where you're judged completely on your follower count and your streams. But ever since hitting a stride with content, I know exactly what I'm doing now. And what's beautiful about that is you just have to refine this one thing that you do. You don't have to worry about doing every new trendy thing, because your audience come to you for a thing. You give them the thing, you get better at the thing over time, and it means that I can compartmentalize music and put it here. I can go over there. I can hang out with my wife. I can have my sneaker collecting habit. I can get into whiskey. It doesn't matter. It's like you can find a sustainable way to live your life, and Lal kind of taught me to do that, and it's been wonderful to go on that journey. I'm not going to lie, it was incredibly difficult. I went through phases of wanting to give up music altogether because I thought, I don't understand how to be successful. I don't know how to build an audience. But it turns out, build it and they will come couldn't be more true. And I think that if there's any artists listening, honestly, just make the music you want to make. If you're authentic, people will notice that and people will react to it positively, like they have with me, I think. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey since Lal came out, but it's time to move on to the next chapter, I think.
Well, it's funny as well because I think a lot of what you've been saying just now actually kind of reflects the topic area of this new single as well.
Yeah.
So the reason why we're here today is because you have released your new single, One Myna, and I'm gonna ask you to like tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah.
But I think as well it's really interesting how, from my understanding from like the press brief and stuff, it very much does focus on this idea of being very worried and constantly thinking about people's perception of you or staying on the right path, whatever, so much so that you actually end up missing opportunities that are coming in real time. But yeah, I'll let you get into it now. So like, what is One Myna about for you?
Sonically, One Myna sounds a bit like Lal would have sounded if there hadn't been a pandemic. I wasn't allowed to be in the same room as my producer drummer, who lives an hour away from me, which isn't far, but it was during the pandemic. We all remember being bubbled and not being able to see people. And because I wasn't yet married yet, me and my wife couldn't see each other. And like she plays flute on the record as well. So my album Lal, as successful as it became eventually, it's not a very live album. It's got a very bedroom pop energy because it had to be done remotely. And I thought, I built up a really good live show with Lal, but people would keep going back to the record and going, oh, why doesn't the record sound as wild as the live show? And it's like, well, that's what the pandemic will do. So with this new single or next run of singles, One Myna being the first one, I'm going to be leaning into the live sound a little bit. Like, if you're into this, come to one of the gigs, leaning into the strengths of my live band. Like, I've been blessed to have such a talented group of musicians behind me. My drummer, for Young Fathers last summer, they were on tour with Depeche Mode. He was playing like Old Trafford, touring arenas for a summer. And it made me think, all right, he's one of my best friends, but he's going to fly the nest. It's time to let him go. But no, he's so invested in what I wanted to do. The minute he was done with his arena tour activities, he was like, no, let's get right back to it. He's playing to no more than 500 people at most with me at the moment, but to know that he's this invested in the project means that it makes sense that it should include him a bit more. This new single's got a lot more live feel to it. My wife's playing flute and keys on it as well. The title One Myna refers to folklore. You can find this folklore in India. You can find it in Australia. It's quite an interesting story. It's the idea of a myna is a kind of bird, and if you see two of them, it's good luck. But if you see one of them, it's bad luck. So you get people who see one in the sky and then they're waiting about, wasting their lives, waiting for that second bird to turn up. So for me, I feel like that was so relatable because I'd spend so much time worrying about the influencer culture of, oh, I've done this thing, but I've not done that other thing yet. Like, a thing I didn't mention earlier was a thing that I've done since we last spoke is I went on the road with my favorite guitar band of all time, Tenari Win, which ironically, a lot of my younger listeners have no idea who they are, but they're this kind of Tuareg guitar band, and they mix like African folk traditions with blues music, and nothing sounds like them. And I discovered them as a teenager, and I'd never seen brown people play guitar in a band before that point. And it kind of inspired me in a way that continues to the present day. And when I was on the road with one of my favorite bands, the band who are responsible for me having a line of guitars behind me, it's like, why am I not enjoying this more? I'm just worried about, oh, I have to make the show good, or I have to make sure that, everything's running on time as far as the tour's going. And it's like, wow, I'm waiting for that second bird to turn up. I'm not enjoying the fact that it's like a good thing that I'm going on tour with my favorite band of all time. And this single isn't just me telling my audience to be present. It's like a journal entry to myself telling me, looking in the mirror and going, hey, life's actually not too bad. Like, I think because of the old type mismatch of the team I had before me, there was this kind of insistence that you needed to focus on things like metrics and the amount of engagement that you get. Whereas now it's for me, it's like I'd rather really nurture the right audience. And for me, learning that was such a big life lesson. And now that I'm more present, when I go on an Instagram live and all the comments are really positive, or people are really excited for this new single, even not even having heard it yet, it's like, wow, I have such a engaged and devoted fan base. I owe them something. I have this responsibility to them, but I can be present while I do that, So One Myna is it's the most personal song I've written in a little while. It's weird to not be putting out constantly political music. I am going to be releasing a run of singles for the next 6 weeks until the end of the year. Like every 6 weeks, there's going to be a new single out, and One Myna is the first one. There's going to be some really exciting collaborations with some singers in Norway, singer in London, someone in Canada. Like it's fun to just be collaborating and having a bit of fun. I obviously have another very political concept album in the chamber, but I'm refining the way it sounds, and I have such a big, ambitious vision for it that I want to strike a balance where I'm enjoying the present, but in the future, I've got this project coming up that I really want to give its best shake, And it's like this new single, it's a mix of like the live sounds of the shows that we've been refining over the past couple of years since Laal came out, but it's also me exploring a lot of my Tamil South Indian heritage. There's a lot of sounds in there that are very like mainstream South Indian cinema in nature. Like I wanted to sound like you're watching like a mainstream Telugu or Tamil movie, but all the sounds are rearranged in a way that's only like the way I would do it. Like it ends on this kind of guitar riff that's that's almost stereotypically the way I play, but it's also got Murdingham samples. It's got this really like Coke Studio sounding flute bits in it. Yeah, I'm excited to see what people make of it. Did you feel like it sounded a lot different to the other stuff you'd heard by me?
I think so. I think it sounded a lot more, I don't know how else to say this, but a lot more radio friendly.
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
sense that
And
it was like it felt like it was following a bit more of a classic Western, that structure, both sonically and in terms of how things came about. I wouldn't say less experimental, because you still have all that experimental stuff in there and all that fusion, but at the same time, a lot of the tracks on Laal, I really didn't know where it was going to go. You know what I mean? Like each track, it could go in a drastically different direction, but One Myna very much like it has its vibe the whole way throughout the 2 minutes that's playing.
Yeah, it's the shortest single I've ever put out. It's like just over 2 minutes long. I think maybe this sucks the romance and the artistry out of it to some people, but it doesn't for me personally. But I like to write a song with a function for that song in mind, because if you're trying to get a message to people, it can be something as basic as, hey, maybe don't be so homophobic or sexist, right? Or let's talk about this thing in our brown communities that we're not talking about. If you're constantly subverting expectations, on one level, that's exciting. But on the other level, you want to break it up with stuff where people know what they're going to get and they find it inviting enough to dance along to it. I was at a club night not long ago where the DJ was trying loads of stuff, but me and my mates, we'd had a bit to drink and we were a bit frustrated listening to it. We were like a cool dub beat would get going. He'd chuck some samples on and it was like, yeah, this slaps. And then it would stop after like 45 seconds. I remember being like really irritated. Like that bit was really cool. I would have liked to vibed to that for a few more minutes. So with that in mind, I was kind of thinking there's a bunch of experimental tangent laden stuff that I've put out, but what would it be like if I put that creative limitation in of, no, there has to be a vibe and it's there the whole time. Like people who've heard it, like I was quite lucky that Vic Galloway at the BBC like debuted the song at the beginning of last week on his show. And people were quite excited that I had this kind of dancehall beat and that it was still doing its thing of going on loads of little tangents, but there was a vibe that it stuck to from the beginning into the end. And I think there's as much talent in sticking to that as there is sticking as much on as you possibly can. Because there's something about getting people dancing that's going to get them to engage with the cause, if you get what I mean. Because if you think about a lot of tunes from back when that have got people to really engage with the topic, sometimes they're confrontational. How many really incredible confrontational punk tunes are there? But I think I have to really think about my audience, and like I'm trying to hit like people in South Asian communities, specifically in the UK. They really want to dance. I don't know if they're as fussed about crossing their arms at a hardcore show and taking it in, if you know what I mean. So I think a big part of the journey from Lal coming out to One Myna coming out is me going, right, so I have developed this kind of British Asian Indian diaspora fan base, but it's like there's certain things I grew up with that don't mean anything to them. And I have to let that go a little bit, because you can be like, hey, I grew up with all this indie rock. Like that doesn't, it might not mean anything to them if it means a lot to me. And me understanding that is if I'm posting stuff that they're not into, it's probably not going to reach them enough to have them engage with me more than they are. So it's not that I'm hiding parts of myself, but it's understanding what parts of yourself your audience react to, what they're interested in. Like they're really interested in whenever I buy like a new jacket or a new hat or a new pair of sneakers. But if I go on about some boomer rock band from the 70s that I quite like, they couldn't care less. And it's just understanding that, you know, your audience are your audience and it's important to know who they are. One Myna is definitely going to lean into that. Like I think that the younger fan base, from what they've heard of it, we played it live for the first time just there, and people really into it. I think that's the new direction as well. People just aren't expecting something that's that straightforward on first listen, but the more you delve in, the more layers they are. Yeah, it's exciting.
So just to clarify as well, you've obviously said about releasing a new single every 6 weeks going forward. Are these singles going to be sort of standalone, or are they going to be following a similar theme throughout? Like what's the plan in terms of that?
A thing I've lent into, and it's probably something you've noticed as well, is that due to these juggernauts like Spotify, there's definitely like a model of releasing music now where people feel a bit like gaslit into, a bit like we were talking about before we started recording, needing to post on social media all the time, needing to release music all the time. And I guess I would never judge anybody for feeling daunted by that or angry that that's the state of the industry right now. But I guess I've kind of decided my fan base are younger. They consume music in a specific way. If I'm going to connect with them or nurture that fan base more, I've kind of got to lean into what works for them, which is releasing music regularly. And for me, the next little while I ready the next album, it's not going to be thematically linked by politics the same way that the prior albums were. That doesn't mean that I'm any less political than I was. I mean, I'm doing video essays about Dalit history all this month for Dalit History Month. I'm playing songs against the caste system every single gig I've ever done, so that's not going anywhere. But I'm having a bit of fun with it. I'm collaborating with some friends I've made online, like TikTok and Instagram. People who've just got in touch going, hey, I live in Norway and you live in Glasgow, but we're both Tamil, and that's exciting, right? Let's work on something and see where we can take it. So the singles, you'll know it's me playing the guitar, you'll know it's me singing here and there, but you know, there's a lot of surprises planned. I'm trying different things, and who knows how successful some of these experiments are going to be. But at the same time, I think we shouldn't be afraid to experiment ever, I don't think. Like, this isn't me saying that you're going to get a metal song next month and then an R&B song the month after. There's going to be like a through line that One Myna is setting you up for the next however many months of singles. But there's going to be a lot of like playful experimentation going on there. And some of it's going to be a lot more straightforward than people expect. Some of it might be quite different, but these singles aren't linked together the way Sacred Boar and Lal were thematically per se. But there is definitely another concept album in the chamber, but it's like the concept behind that, it's quite ambitious, it's quite broad in a way. And what I need to do between now and when I announce that album is I almost need to get my fan base really revved up and engaged with what I'm currently doing, so that when I drop the album on them, they're going to be ready to engage with the topics they're in. There's not going to be anything like wildly unpredictable there, politically speaking. I mean, I'm a leftist singer, I always will be. But you know, when you just, sometimes you get old enough where you just kind of go, this isn't quite there yet, but I'm going to work on it, and then one day it will be. But in the meantime, there's the narrative that you need to drop music yourself, and that can sound terrifying. I couldn't, on my own, completely independently drop a new song every 4 weeks. I just couldn't do it. However, maybe I'll drop a remix. Maybe I'll drop a little collab where all I'm doing is playing the guitar in the background of another friend's beat or something like that. There's a lot of that going on. And I think that me reckoning with, how do British Asian or South Asian diaspora artists, or even South Asian artists, how do they communicate with each other? What's the community around their music? You can't get rid of your past, but I very much grew up with a culture of touring, like a lot of just very indie guitar driven music tropes, whereas it's just not really how South Asian people communicate. Like me and my wife have very different, we're both South Asian, but my wife's background was she grew up with Kiss FM, she grew up with her cousins giving her mixtapes. And like, I speak to a lot of brown people and go, "Oh, how many gigs do you go to?" And they're like, "Well, I don't really go to many gigs." Like the idea of seeing a wee band in like some kind of armpit bar somewhere in the middle of town is just not their vibe. Or the idea of sitting through a bunch of indie bands they would never listen to just to hear me, that again isn't really what they're about. Whereas listening to remixes, listening to collaborations between artists they really like, that's more their speed. That's how they communicate. That's how they connect with the artists that they really like. Like if you think of the artists, like, I'm assuming you guys must have discussed when like a bunch of brown folk played Coachella and that was this big sea change for brown musicians as a whole. If you think about a lot of the musicians who played, you wouldn't look at any of those artists and think that's an artist who toured in smelly vans. The way they went about building a fan base was very, very different. And it took me until very recently to realize that if you want to do that, be in an indie band. But if you want to make South Asian focused music, you have to go about things in a way that's going to make sense to brown people, And if they communicate and listen to music in a way where it's about getting interesting remixes done, collaborating with other brown musicians, then yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So next few weeks, going to put out another single, but I'm not going to stop talking about One Myna just because there's another song out. I think the excitement of getting to put content out all the time is I can constantly remind people how much music there is and how much music's coming out. So One Myna will be out by the time this drops. It'll be available on all platforms that you listen to music on. You can follow me at my name, where I'll be going into what the song's about all over again, talking about how I put it together, all the incredible personnel involved. I've had an interesting renaissance on social media since we last spoke, because I would take to posting, like, classical music's a big part of my practice as a musician. I play a lot of Indian classical music on the guitar, and I had a viral moment a couple of weeks ago with one of those videos. And ever since then, people kind of expect incessant guitar content from me. And I mean, I play the guitar a lot. You can see them all in the background. But I want to strike a balance between, yep, I play the guitar a lot, it pays my bills, but I do other things too. And I think that it's exciting to see that I'm at the forefront of exploring what else my audience like from me and where that goes. So really appreciate being asked on the show and, having a catch up as well, because you guys probably speak to so many musicians and the idea of being allowed to return is a big deal, because sometimes you feel like it's one and done. There's like a revolving door of people and you're like, yep, here's your 5 minutes on our platform. Because I'll be honest, when you consider that a lot of that north of the Midlands, there's not a lot of opportunity for South Asian musicians or artists to talk about themselves or what they're doing. So the idea of a northern hub for that is incredible. Like, respect to you guys for doing what you're doing.
Nah, thank you. I mean, obviously, it's not like we're having you on every single month to be like, okay, this month I did this month I did that. But having a whole year and a bit, it's evident from the past half an hour that we've been speaking that you've been up to loads, and it's been great to talk about that. Just as a closing thing as well, it's my understanding that you got some quite exciting stuff coming up in the summer. So I don't know if you want to chat about that briefly.
Yeah, for sure. I realized that I mentioned it to you because we're friends and I wanted to tell you, but I need to be a bit cloaked about it, but I will announce it soon. There's going to be a South Asian festival in the summer. It's a really exciting one by the amazing people who've put on other big South Asian festivals. I've practically given the game away by saying that, but there's going to be like a northern version of an iconic South Asian festival in the UK happening in the summer. It will be happening in Manchester in July, and I have been asked to perform at it. And, as you can tell from my accent, I'm not local to Manchester or the surrounding area, but I'm from the north of the UK. And while Manchester might be south for me, there's a northern identity regardless of what color or race you are. And to be accepted as part of that is this massive deal. And I think that being invited to play in Manchester again, especially on such a big stage, is incredibly exciting. And without naming names, I think I'm getting really close to the line I can cross. I'm getting as close as without falling into it, but it'll be on the 20th of July. So if you've seen me in Manchester before, or maybe you were at Manchester Jazz Festival and I played last year and you enjoyed what you heard, be doing a full band show on July the 20th in Manchester at a festival that will be announced. It is a big deal. I can tell you that much. But it's like, I will have released a good few singles by then. I'll be playing the best of what was on LAL alongside those new singles. It's really exciting that people are inviting me back. I keep thinking that the next big gig is going to be the last big gig that I get, like Roundhouse, Dialed In, or whatever. But being asked to play this festival is such a big deal because for me, it's this like intersection of the fact that I love being British Asian as an artist, but I'm from the north of the UK and it's a very specific identity. In our first conversation, me and you talked about how it's quite not segregated, a dodgy word, but it feels different. Like when I'm in Newcastle, when I'm in Manchester, the vibe's a bit different to when I'm out in London or when I'm out in Brighton or where I'm out in Birmingham. Do you know what I mean? And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a kinship, I think, that Scottish people feel with Newcastle, with Manchester. There's something about it when you're there that if it weren't for the accent, you'd forget you were in a different country, technically speaking. Like you feel at home.
Definitely looking forward to that. Well, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today. It's been a pleasure.